It's going so far, it's going okay. As far as we can see, the polls only opened 2 hours ago. I've been watching the internet, I've been watching several television stations and things like that, and there have been no glitches yet.
As we know, the leading party, African National Congress, ANC, on this election needs to defend their position. But what is really situation and the part that seems powerful in South Africa?
Okay, thank you. That's a very good question. Most South Africans are asking themselves that very question today, because the ANC, the party of Nelson Mandela, the party of Thabo Mbeki, is also the party of Jacob Zuma. And the ANC has been in power for the last 30 years. They started with a very strong majority of about 67%. And slowly over the years, the majority of the ANC in parliament has been reduced. Slowly, they've been losing their overall support. Now, the crucial thing about this election is that some of the polls, in fact, a good number of the polls, have said that the ANC are going to lose their overall majority. That means they will have fewer than 50% of the votes. And that means if they do want to form a government, they're going to have to be a government in coalition with some of the other parties. And depending on whether it gets 45% or 47%, that'll determine the parties they choose to go into coalition with. They may need to go into a grand coalition that is with some of the larger parties, or they can choose some of the smaller parties, and there are lots of smaller parties standing for parliament. So the question is, will the ANC get their 50%? And most people suggest that's not going to happen. And then the second question is, with whom will they go into coalition if they get less than 50%?
How the election goes for the special groups from the Monday and Tuesday?
It's gone very, very clearly, very unproblematic. There are 31,000 teams that are going around the country, teams of 2 people going around the country doing home visits. For example, elderly people who can't get out of homes. 31,000 teams have gone to visit them where they sort of help the elderly people to do their votes. People, for example, my parents live in a village of elderly people, and the Independent Electoral Commission sent a team for maybe 200 elderly people living in that village to do their votes. Obviously, medical workers, media workers, people working in the elections themselves, police, they've all been involved in the special votes. And so they've been, they've been over 900,000 people doing special votes on Monday and Tuesday, so that today, Wednesday, they're able to be involved in essential services.
So
there were about 100 polling stations which didn't operate on Monday. They hadn't got themselves organized sufficiently by Monday, but by Tuesday, yesterday, things were happening according to routine.
As we know, every candidate participated well in the election campaign. Who seems the hope of South Africa in terms of going to solve some challenge that facing South Africa, like a shortage of water, shortage of electricity, and employment?
Okay, those are several reasons why the politicians, or the people studying politics, are saying that the ANC is likely to lose its majority, because the ANC inherited a functioning infrastructure. Obviously, they've had to expand the infrastructure enormously as the population has grown and as people have come into the cities. They've tried to provide water and electricity for all people because these are regarded as human rights, but the ANC has failed in that. And a lot of the infrastructure is decaying because maintenance, electricity maintenance, water maintenance hasn't been done. And so the infrastructure which the ANC has inherited is aged and it's falling apart, and they haven't been maintaining all the infrastructure as they should. So there's a lot of frustration.
Do you see South African, they see the ANC, they will back in leading again?
Well, I mean, what I see and what the majority of the population see might be two different things. But the ANC has incredibly loyal followers. The question is, will they get their 50% majority? They'll certainly get above 40%. So will they be the leading party in parliament? That seems unquestionable, but they will have to go into parliament as a coalition government.
Okay. We know they already started voting. How the situation of protection and security from them?
Well, the army has been deployed. Normally, the army doesn't come out. Normally, the army is not involved in politics, but the Independent Electoral Commission has requested that the police obviously be present at every polling station, and the army in some areas where they anticipate there may be dissatisfaction or people will become quite unruly, the army is there just to keep peace and order. We've never, ever had post-election violence. We've never had in South Africa people being killed or anything like that after the elections. But I think that's because we take the election process seriously and there's a lot of security around every polling station.
Julius Malema is among of the opposition. How he is poised of not receiving migrants to enter South Africa in order to give the chance or opportunity from the South African young people or other who need the employment from who are resident of South Africa?
Well, I think, remember, he comes from the ANC Youth League. He left the ANC Youth League to form his own economic freedom fighters. And he appeals to a very young group of South Africans. He's got a very populist rhetoric. And so part of the populist rhetoric is to make sure that South Africans get jobs first.
And how have the arguments of some people, we just heard about the argument of some people in the West, they want to separate. How does this affect the election process?
When you talk about the West, you mean the Western Cape. I think that's a pipe dream. I think it's a tiny minority. There's no real movement for separatism. I mean, most people see that they need to belong to a united South Africa. People in the Western Cape, they've been voting for the Democratic Alliance for several years, and they've had Democratic Alliance in charge of their province of the Western Cape. And generally, the facilities are better maintained, and people are moving to the Western Cape, but there's no real groundswell for independence. Some people may use that as their rhetoric, but it's not going to happen.
And in conclusion, I want to know what is your opinion on the way you observe the voting process in this year.
So, as I said at the beginning, I've been watching the news media so far. It's only been going for 2 hours, and there have been no reports on the news media of any disruptions or late starts or anything like that. So I think it's going to go very well. The Catholic Church has been very involved in voter education. The Jesuit Institute has been doing a lot of work with the Bishops' Conference, going and teaching people what they need to do to vote, because it's different to previous years. We have 3 ballot papers this year instead of the normal 2 ballot papers in previous years. And so people should know by the time they get to the polling stations what their duty will be, which has been different to previous years.